is such a problem solver. This is Brian Bishop, who helped us with endless Zoom programs where you can get, there he is, and save this again. So I am going to explain what we're doing tonight and the clever program. So that's always dangerous. Overconfidence is a way of jinxing, so I think it will be very pleasant. So we'll know more soon. So this is your opening orientation here. I am Patty Limerick, and I'm the faculty director at Southern American West, and we're doing really well. We have, in the time since you might have been with us, we have had this very successful program, the Mellon Foundation program on applied history. We've had an offshoot of that, the Rosenblum program, and both of those I work with young historians to help them reach wider audiences. And then we have an extremely dynamic and enjoyable and fruitful relationship with the veteran military, with the Veteran and Military Affairs Office. And that has been extraordinary. And the student veterans, you'll hear more about them. Right, but tonight, I shall give you a quick orientation. If you haven't heard this yet, you're hearing it now. The Southern American West was depopulated in the middle of 2021. The famed Great Resignation that swept the nation. Well, for reasons I don't understand, National Public Radio, New York Times, they forgot to cover the fact that the Southern American West was the epicenter of that. So we had quite a shift there. We lost 4 people from who all I think ended up with at least a couple with much better paying jobs, and so yay, we can all cheer as they do that. It was really great. They abandoned us. It was really great. They were doing it for good reason, and we valued the time they spent with us, and we're sad didn't go. So when we looked at what would have been the 23rd round of the Thompson Prize competition, 23 years. Yeah. So we gave a prize for 22 years for the best senior student writing about the American West. It was a wonderful event. Jack and Jeannie Thompson made it possible. There are so many young people who got a sense of this is what I can do because you made that possible. So if you're sitting at your home computer, clap with us now. Right. So we didn't have, but after the depopulation, we did not have the capacity to run a competition. So what to do? Well, why not try this? Why not look back over our breathtaking talent pool? And the word breathtaking, there is no exaggeration. Look at our talent pool of winners of this prize, then engage, and I did this wholeheartedly, engage in agony over the fact that we could not coordinate a reconvening of all those folks. We couldn't pay proper attention to. There were limits on what we could do. We could not have organize a series of wondrous presentations that would go on for days and days. That was not viable. So as soon as I had done the agony to the best of my ability, I then had to move on to the plan, perfectly workable plan, celebrating this talent pool one person at a time. So then, which person? How would we go into that selection process? Well, the local public radio station, KUSC, came to my aid. Reporter Erin O'Toole solved my problem by broadcasting a spectacular interview with Jenny Shank, who is the author of a recently published collection of short stories called Next Coming. So here we are. I have one more round of explaining about what we were up to tonight. Plan number 1, which is a perfectly fine plan. Plan number 1 was I will interview this gifted author about this powerful book. Then that got even better when I started to think that this was really great because I learned that she had been reviewing Western American literature in a prominent place for years, so we would have all kinds of things to talk about. Reminisce about, I have no idea. So that was going to be really good. But then, reading the book, I realized how fully this book and its author are directly aligned with the dreams and hopes, the aspirations and the ambitions of the Southern American West. In terms of the people, well, the very title, mixed company, we can be in each other's company, we can have our conflicts and deal with them, and we can be richer for it. That was so much a match, and I don't know how much, I think you were an independent inventor of that approach. I think even worse, you had your own aspirations and ambitions before you even came to college. So we're going to get no credit for her. Is that right? Okay, so, but however it happened, it worked out really well. And she is the embodiment in these stories. I'm gonna say this, her soul is really what we hope to see more of in the image. So plan number 2 was then given its format when I thought about the old TV show, This Is Your Life. And only a few people here will remember that, but there would be a character, the character would come out, and then the host would say, listen to this voice, and the character, is that the 4th grade teacher I had who made such a difference? And yes, and then the 4th grade teacher would come out and very joyous. So that's not exactly what we're doing tonight. We're not doing that at all. But what I decided we could do is not Jenny Price, This Is Your Life. We could do Jenny Price, this event tonight is not exactly your life, but Jenny Price, I'm saying the wrong name from our last book. Jenny, I got the Jenny Shank, I beg your pardon, Jenny Shank, we had a Jenny Price there, but anyway.
There's many of us.
Oh, Lord.
That's what I put on my Twitter bio. It's one of the Jenny. It's the most common name for 30 years. So I take no offense. I usually went by Shank.
Well, okay, so Shank. I can't believe I did that. It's really embarrassing. So, okay, moving on, embarrassed, but moving on. So, Jenny Shank, this is your book, or precisely this evening is your book refracted through the points of view and experiences and perspectives of real people who you have never met, but whose lives and characters are very directly connected to the stories you wrote. That's cool.
That is cool.
Yeah. Would you prefer to have people from your life?
No.
I guess you might go that way. So, and no one from Jenny Price's life is going to be. I have to really wing it. Yeah. So we have 4 presenters or commentators or embodiments of characters, or they'll tell us more about what it felt like to read this and think, some common ground here. So we have Sharika Anderson Thomas, our first commentator, and she was my student 20 years, 5 century 6. Boy, are you?
Oh my God.
Well, she was here in the mid 1990s.
Yeah.
And we did get to have a lot of quality time, and that was really good. And then she has gone on to become a nurse, which is a training program that terrified me, but you did that, so that's really good. And so she will be, she was, to give a little bit away here, she was in the Denver Public Schools at the same time that, almost precisely off by 1 year, that Jenny was in the Denver Public Schools and had just opportunities for Sharika to read stories about that classroom experience and say, that's kind of like what it was and kind of not like whatever it is she wants to say. And then we have Ellie Chaplin, who was here on Zoom. Excuse me, we're so fortunate to have, there's Ellie Chaplin. And Ellie Chaplin is in our Rosenblum Scholars Program. She is writing her dissertation on the Americans with Disability Act as it played out in real people's efforts to write letters to government and to say, what has happened? There's a law. Why am I not benefiting from it? How can it apply to me? So it's quite a little capsule description, but Ellie is my Zoom pal. I've only consulted with her on this project on Zoom, but she is very knowledgeable in a way that really gives her a chance to read these stories, 3 or 4 stories that are about people with disabilities. And I'm so happy, I don't want to read too much, but she actually told me this afternoon that she has one of the stories in particular she wants to bring to the attention of some practitioners, disability activists, which that would be cool. Okay, so Ellie is here, that capacity, and then we have Karen Boyd, and Karen Boyd is the American Sign Language instructor here on campus. And she is the successor to Amanda Willie Moore. And we are so fortunate. We tried to track down really where we found
Hello.
class. And so we are really, really lucky to have Karen Boyd, who
Yes, hello, everyone.
just torments of plenty with emails. How many emails did you get from me, Karen? Do you happen to keep track? Was I at like 91 emails to you by the time we got there? But and she teaches a lot of classes.
Yes, I did. Are you able to hear me? Yeah, I was working and I found that it seems that when I was signing to the panel, they could see me sign. And so they decided, hey, you need to come here tonight. So I said, okay, I will, and I'll do my best.
Thank you so much.
And also to let you know, our other interpreter, Rebecca, is as a participant, and she needs to be promoted to the panelist, please. We've not been able to contact anyone. We've been trying for quite some time.
Oh, okay. Tell me your name.
This is Catherine, and the other interpreter is Rebecca.
Okay. So
Yes, they did it. It's done. It's taken care of. Thank you.
Oh, Catherine and Rebecca are very important teammates, and we are so grateful to. Thank you so much, Karen. And I did not get to 91 emails, but I got the 56. So that you put up with all of them, so I appreciate that very much.
Yes, great.
Sam Rapp was my student in the mid-1970s at Yale when I had I had exactly what I wanted, and I had known that was what I wanted, to have a great number of football players in my classes. And I had lived for at least 25 or so years there, and I did not know that that was my ambition and aspiration. And then it turned out it was my dream. So, so it was pretty fun. And I shall, well, we'll talk about that because there is an important story. And I did the second time I read it was even more intense than the first time. So we're going to talk about that, and Sam will be our commentator when we get to that. The story that involves the football players also involves Karen and American Sign Language. So guess what we have done? What you see assembled tonight is in fact mixed company. I could think. So I'm really, really happy with that. So then I will, what we're going to do is that for the first 10 minutes or so, I will return to plan number 1, and I will interview Jenny about her writing career. And then I will activate plan 2, and I will ask our 4 guests in sequence to talk about the stories that most directly intertwine their lives with Jenny's writing. And then, since only a few of you have already read the book, we are determined not to befuddle you. That is our mission. And so when we are going to talk about a particular story, one of us, and it could be Jenny or it could be the person who brought up the story, will give a breathtakingly efficient summary. And I think maybe we probably want to go with her on that. So do not fear, those of you on Zoom and those of you here, do not fear thinking, who, what, who, what. So that's going to be taken care of. Then every commentator has been given the option of reading aloud a paragraph or two that carry particular force for them. If they would like to do that, or to ask Jenny to read it. Yeah. So now I'm going to reveal the real bedrock full force Patty Limerick agenda for tonight. I believe that Jenny Shank is at this time an inexplicably under-recognized writer. And I want you to join me in changing that. I'm going to do it. Thank you, Patty. You're welcome. Well, really, I mean, thank you, Erin. Thank you for doing that interview with me. But it's not, and the nation, I mean, people would enjoy the reading experience. That's fine. I'm all for that. But they would be people with a new sense of possibility and vision of how we can be in each other's companies. Okay. So, Jenny, yes. Okay. So tell them about where you were from and tell them about your childhood in Denver. Okay. And I'm going to leave because I don't have any water to use. So I'll be back.
So I grew up in Denver. My parents moved from Nebraska when I was 4, 1980 to Denver. So they kind of missed all the battles over immigration that were going on. And court order immigration busing was put into place. And my mom she came from a small town, or not even a town, just the middle of nowhere, Nebraska. She went to a one-room schoolhouse where she was the only person in her own grade until the 7th grade. And so she came and she visited the public school that I was assigned to. It was across town. I lived in Southeast Denver, and I took the bus like a half hour down the highway to Cheltenham, which was near the old Mile High Stadium. My mom just went and visited, and she's like, "Oh, the teachers are nice. There's other kids in her class. Like, this is great." So yeah, he's like, "Yeah, just ride the bus. It's free." Yeah. So that's what we did. Like, they had missed they were not there during the time when people were arguing about it. So they were just like, "This is good. It's public school. There's kids. Let's go." And so I started out. Cheltenham was it was interesting because the Chicano rights movement was really, Denver was a major hub of it. And so in the late 70s, when they were deciding to integrate the schools, it was not just an issue of black and white, it was also the Chicano community had a big say in it. And they did not want to have their children bussed out. They wanted their own neighborhood schools where they could teach about their culture. And so I ended up going to a school that was kind of forged in that vision. There were like Aztec murals on the walls. There was a lot of Spanish spoken. We were really good. We would be called the ayudante of the week. It's like the helper of the week. We had mercados and like everything like that. And so I just grew up learning about other people's cultures there. And we also had a lot of refugees from different places. I remember Hmong kids. I remember Russian Jews. I remember Vietnamese kids. And so that was just what I got used to, was going into a place that was totally different from mine. So I rode the bus there for 3 years. And then in third grade, the program was they, from that neighborhood, came to my neighborhood for 3 years, from like 4th through 6th grade. And then 7th through 8th, I was bused to Northeast Denver to a completely different group of kids. It was a predominantly Black neighborhood near 5 Points, Cole Middle School. So I went there and kind of white flight had already happened before this. Like a lot of white families had left, but I think white flight kind of continued when people didn't want to go to Cole. But like Cole is like the absolute center of my creative imagination. Like it appears in my next book I'm writing too. Like I'm so thankful that I had that experience. It was a little harrowing at times because it was a prep school during the crack wars in the early 90s, but the people there were so creative and interesting, and I loved it actually. And then after that, I went to high school somewhat near my house at Thompson Prize. So I just always was in situations where I was with different cultures, different communities. I got to learn about every part of Denver. I was really comfortable with people speaking a language that I didn't speak in the room, or just kind of learning the language as I went along, and that felt normal to me. And so then the first shock I had was I went to college at Notre Dame, and I got there, I was like, where is everybody else? Like, what is this? And yeah, but yeah, so then I learned that too. How do you go with these kind of people? How do you go to school with these kind of people? So that's kind of my background.
And you don't ever say, oh, that was too unsettled and I was placed in uncomfortable situations and I should have been protected and given you don't say that to yourself.
No, I mean,
You're looking at me like I'm saying, and you ever have it?
no, because it's true that I think most parents like try to avoid situations like that. Like a lot of my schools were terrible if you look at their test scores or their poverty rates or anything like that.
Right.
A lot of parents would avoid sending their kids to those, but I think send them because you learn so much more and you maintain friendships with people your whole life. At least if they go wherever you can, that a lot of people don't have such a very friendly anymore. And it's just, I mean, if we're going to live in the same country with each other, we have to experience each other, spend time with each other.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's the reason for the cause tonight, why we're going to make this writer better recognized, because that is the core. And this is a theme that I'm not going to pursue, but I grew up in a small town where we only had one high school. So I think our city fathers might have wanted to segregate it, but just one high school. So I think I might have in some ways replicated the congruence between what I tried to do in studying Record West and what you've done here. I think I feel a little bit like I would think, well, of course we would know this people. Yeah, and who would you be if you didn't? So, okay, so I'm not going on that road. I'm going to do that privately more sometimes. So, okay, so I'm going to ask you about, I guess I'm just going to say, your childhood seems to be the best possible thing that can happen to you as a citizen and as a writer.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I would agree. I would agree with that. Yeah.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, my parents were like, the school's free. Get a free bus ride across town every day. Every single day.
Did your parents, or do they know what they achieved?
I think so. I mean, they read my stories and things like that. And I don't know. I don't know how they think about it. They just were doing what they they thought to do at the time, like with the resources you have, and, they visit the school, and they're like, this is fine. So,
It's very cool.
Yeah.
So I'm going to maybe go quickly to this question about the figures in your stories who are well-intentioned white people.
mhm.
And they may not be doing the right thing, but that's probably because they don't know what the right thing is.
Mhm.
But there's a bunch of them. And could you pick one or two of them and tell these people about a well-intentioned white person?
Well, I think first of all, growing up like how I did, even if you were, if your teachers were Black and the teachers were Asian and your friends were and everyone, you think you understand better, and maybe you do, but you don't understand completely. Like there's still plenty I'm learning all the time because you can't know that other person's experience unless you listen to them and read their stories. So I take little shards of that, like awkward things that I've done, kind of, or awkward things I've seen, I've observed, and I put them into stories. So I really love the awkwardness.
Love the opportunity.
Because it's just a good tension for your story, and it's a good way for people to consider their own behavior. So like, I guess there's one story called La Texicana where it was inspired by, I mentored a young lady in Denver when she was 12, when she was 18, and her family was Mexican American, and the program that I worked with gave these kids, low-income kids in Denver, a scholarship to St. Mary's Academy in like Littleton, and just going through that with her and experiencing culture shock and things like that. But the position of someone that volunteers to do something like that, you're like, I'm doing something good here. You're like patting yourself on the back for doing that. But it's not always the case that you're not the hero, for sure. For sure, you're not the hero. You're learning more from the people that are allowing you into their lives, I think, than the other way around. Even if you have some like resources and insights that you provide them. And so I think that there's a reversal in that story that shows that that's true.
Right, and tell them about Gwen.
Is Gwen the adopted mother? Yes.
Gwen.
Okay, so Gwen is, so the story is local honey, and I got an idea for that story. One time, I was a music writer for many years for Westward and Onion and a bunch of places, and I interviewed Ray Kwan of the Wu-Tang Clan, and I got to go to their show at the Fillmore. And this was probably when I was in my mid to late 20s, but I had never been like moshed around at a concert so much. I was like bashed around so much, and I was like, it'd be really funny to put like a middle-aged woman in this situation.
Well, that's really funny.
So I just like held that thought.
Awkward.
And then I thought, and then I have a lot of friends who are either, they have been adopted by parents of a different race, or they have adopted a child of a different race. And so just talking to them and observing over the years. And then it kind of all crystallized. I was in Taos at the Laughing Horse Inn, which is where Paige Lawrence used to hang out. And it's kind of a bed and breakfast where there's a breakfast table. And I saw a young man who looks a lot like the young man in the story. He was like 13 or 14. He was a young Black man. He stood straight. He was perfectly groomed. He had like iron shirt, iron pants. He just looked like he had it all together. And he had really good posture. I'm like, who is this kid? And I just looked back to see his parents, and his parents were these kind of older, kind of stooped white hippies. And I was like, oh. And my story came together in that moment where I have the white, older hippie parents raising Hugh, and taking. And for his birthday, they decided to take him to the Wu-Tang Clan show. It's his favorite show, but of course, and he can't go on his own. He's not 16 yet. You have to take the younger children. And of course, he's like, oh no, this is horrible. And so that's my awkward situation that I introduced in that story.
So I guess I'm just gonna say, I probably need t-shirts to say love the awkwardness.
Yeah.
I should always be wearing those because that is a beautiful slogan. But it is a really great and generous aspect of this. And I'm not entirely sure where else. I don't know that much about other contemporary writers, but to find a sympathetic portrait several times of white people who are really trying to do the right thing and kind of stumbling over themselves in that. So, okay.
I think it's better that they try
Yeah,
than
right.
not try, or.
Exactly, and the narrators, your narrators tend to be white, and they are humble, and they are often insecure, which I think makes for a better set of reflections on race for those.
Yeah, so I chose them to be white because I really respect the right of people of different races to tell their own stories. Didn't feel right for me to write in first person from, say, a Black character or a single character, because there's writers that can do that and tell that part of the story. But neither did I want to leave all those people out,
Right.
because they exist. And I think, I don't know if we're gonna talk about this later, but like I brought this book because this is like it's called White Flights by Jess Rowe. And it was a book of literary criticism that I found really interesting. It kind of like gave intellectual justification to what I was doing. He studied a bunch of writers that wrote stories set in very diverse places.
I'm sorry, this is the interpreter speaking. There's someone whispering and I can't hear the two speakers. So someone else is speaking in the mic.
Okay,
Thank you.
It was probably me shifting papers around, so.
Oh,
sorry.
no. It was people talking, but thank you. Just want to let you know.
Okay, thank you.
So he looked at, like, for example, Ann Tyler, who says her stories in Baltimore, and he's like, wow, Baltimore is of African Americans. There's not a single Black person in any of her stories. Why? That's weird. It's weird. It's weird to write about a place that has diversity of population and just cut the edges of your story so that none of these people are included. And in doing that, you take a risk as a white writer that you'll get something wrong, but it's the right of the reader to tell you that. It's a right of the readers to say, that's a weird bit of dialogue. That doesn't sound true to me, or whatever they want to say. So I felt like what Jess Rowe is saying is like, we need to write across and take that risk. You take that risk that you will be told that you are stupid. That's fine. I'd rather do that than write a story that has none of the people that actually exist in it. Because I think a lot of people that write stories like that will consider what they're writing to be realism, but actually it's fantasy. And it's not the good kind of fantasy with dragons and wizards. It's a weird fantasy where you're cutting out all the people that exist in the world. Because you feel like you can only safely speak to your own existence. What you have to do is challenge yourself to get those other people in the story in a way that's not patronizing or false or with the white savior narrative or any of those things you don't want to do. So challenge yourself and do it.
Right, and from your angle, that's likely to result in an awkward moment, which will be great, which will present us the next story that has to be. So, okay, so I think we're going to start in our commentary mode now. And I'm going to get a chair so that we can have Sharika join us. So here we have Sharika Anderson, who will sit next to Jenny, so that can be a direct dialogue there. And I haven't seen you in person in a really long time. And when I saw you before, you were not a nurse yet, so congratulations on that. And so now we're going to have Sharika say whatever she would like to say about her impressions of these stories, that we are going to be attuned to the fact that you might have to say a little bit, whatever you both just will hand off to Jenny. If you want to talk about a story, have her do the quick summary.
Okay. Well, I first want to start off saying I was very struck by and delighted about how much I felt familiar with your story. Like, let's see, one of them, first one is the lightest darks, and also Hurts. So I mean, I love all of the stories, and they're is really funny. But I was just struck by how familiar it was to me. I felt like I was back in a classroom at GW. You know, I went there from 92 to 95, and I guess before I get into it, I'll let Jenny just give a rundown of what the lightest lights and the darkest stars were.
Okay, so Lightest Lights Against Darkest Darks was inspired by my experience at Cole Middle School. I had this really cool art teacher. There's some
drug use implications in the story that are not fixed. I often with my stories, I take something true from my life and then I veer off at a certain point. So I'm not saying that my teacher was smoking crack or anything. She was not. But she was this great, cool teacher, but she's kind of racially ambiguous. Like I think she was white, but she had dreadlocks and she kind of she loved to go to Jamaica and she just seemed really comfortable with Black folks. And I thought she was the coolest lady because she's one of the first real artists that I met. She not only taught at the school, but she showed us her work. And the work that my teacher showed me inspired the work I described in the story. So in the story, my protagonist she's a white character that's just started being bused to this school, and she's trying to figure out how to fit in, and it's hard to make friends because everyone lives different parts of town. So she's trying to make friends and trying to figure out how to fit in, and she really likes to draw. And so then some like fireworks spark from there when she tries to, I don't know, impress people or make friends.
Yeah. So I first of all, I thought the description of her was quite funny. Curly hair and like lips that picked out or whatever. But I just thought there were a lot of terminology, language that I could relate to. Like, for example, let's see. Sorry. Oh yeah, so I'd never heard of this kind of ruthless behavior in any adult I knew, but back then it sounded like the whole point of being grown. So I've always heard you're ain't grown by my parents or other people around me. Or this one, the next day though, whenever I saw Erica, she was surrounded by friends, fuming, having angry conversations about some guy. I know he didn't, she kept saying as I eased her up. I'm like, those are total words that we said. And then there's very specific cultural references that are spot on, like the type of music you would listen to. Let's see, you say something about, yeah, taping, like, oh, I'll tape that with cassette tapes. Like, no one uses cassette tapes anymore. There's something In Vogue, like In Vogue was the first CD I ever bought. Actually, no,
In Vogue.
the first cassette, sorry.
My first was Janet Jackson's Rhythm Nation.
Yes, and then you talk about like watching videos and memorizing the dances from videos. I think that may be
Yeah.
Is that in the story?
I don't remember which one that's in.
Well, anyway, it's something I did. So, House Party, I totally, like, that was one of my favorite movies in high school. So there's a lot of like real references that made it feel like I was back in GW. But there's one that I wasn't sure, because you said it's like Ms. Umber is trans. I don't think we used
No,
that.
we didn't. I actually changed that because I didn't want to use an offensive word.
Yeah.
I had to think about like historical language versus what is, the word that was used back then is now considered offensive.
Yes.
And it is offensive. So I was like, okay, so you have that debate, like, do I use the accurate word for 1990
Yeah.
or do I just change it a little so it's not offensive?
Right.
You caught it.
Yeah.
But no, I did change it because of that. I was like,
That makes
this
sense.
isn't accurate, but I don't want to hurt anyone. I don't see the point of hurting anyone.
That's-
So I
that's
changed one
totally
thing.
understood. And then just moving on, I mean, it's all the time. In the short story Hurts, I was a basketball player.
Oh, I didn't know. Oh my
Yes.
gosh, did we play each other?
Maybe.
Yeah.
I actually tore my ACL at TJ. And so I'm like, I wonder if she's going to talk about a girl who tore her ACL.
That would be so fantastic. Almost make it worthwhile.
Yes. But do you want to?
Okay, so Hurts is inspired by my time playing high school basketball at TJ. And so it was probably the same for GW. You would play everybody in Denver, you would play everybody twice. And those teams were diverse. There were some teams that were mostly Mexican American, there were some teams that were mostly Black. And but then you would have like out of league games, like a couple. each time. And that would be a very bizarre experience where you would go to like this white enclave and
Yes.
they would be, just like everything that they chose to do was a little bit funny, like what music are they gonna play when we run out? And it would be something like wrong in some way. It would be black, but it'd be like from 20 years ago or
Although I
something.
do like the songs that you like,
Yeah.
pull it down, that was good.
Yeah, and so there was always a tension, like because it was weird and because you felt like when you went to these other places, it seemed like they had more resources than our schools did. They were cleaner, they had better facilities. They had new uniforms. Our uniforms were totally funky, like totally funky. And these places were just better resourced. And so you went there and you felt like you had something to prove in your basketball game. You wanted to be better than them because they had so much more than you. And so that's kind of what the story is about. The team travels to like a mountain school with blonde girls. And they even play a different type of basketball. They play like very like, I'm gonna call the play. We're gonna set up the play.
Yeah.
And in DPS, we just played street ball, basically. It's like
Oh,
cherry
gosh.
picking, whatever you could do.
It was,
Fouling.
it was so spot on. I was like, yeah, you were there. So there's a part, let's see, what did I want to say about this? Speaking of the differences, they reminded me of how I felt coming to see Boulder. And just how out of place I felt. I just felt like it was, like you say something in here about the girls on the other basketball team. They couldn't relate to us well enough to perceive which of us had unacceptable hairstyles. This character is talking, she's talking about like one of the girls on the basketball team had a jerry curl, which is a hairstyle more like for the 80s.
Yeah.
But she still had it in the 90s, but would they even know the difference? And I feel like that is a familiar thing to me. Like when I see, when I was younger, I would see some Black kids who their hair was like not well put together, and I would be like, oh, they must be adopted by a white family, you know, or they must be around white people because white people are not going to criticize them for their hair, and they're not going to want to, you know, feel like they need to change it. So, I mean, my own son, sometimes like he goes to Kent Denver. I'm the school nurse at Kent Denver, which is very much different from my experience. Sometimes I'm like, that hairstyle would not cut it if you were at my high school. Be merciless. Yes. So even now, it's sort of like that. But anyway, that's what I was going to read.
Look at all of the marks and the
Oh,
margins.
thank
Wow.
you. Yeah, let's see. Yes.
You can see that, what happened to your book with the marks and the margins.
Right.
That's what every author dreams of. is to mark that book.
Yeah, there's so many things I'd like to say. It's hard for me to like grasp it all and give it to you in a way that you can understand.
Oh man, this is so great. I mean, so great to have someone appreciate my story.
Yes, that part you were saying, just because we've got Black people on our team, they have to go and dig out the old school stuff. They can't find anything newer than this. How long does it take for songs to reach the mountains? I just thought that was funny. But the part that I would like to speak more about is that I looked over at the Pinnacle team during warm-up, trying to hide my glances. It was their free throws that began to frighten me. Toe the line, dribble 3 times, crouch, breathe, extend, release, swish. It was clear they practiced with their eyes closed. In Denver Public Schools games, any free throw you happen to make was considered a bonus. They dribbled like they had practiced their precision around orange cones for years and moved in their plays, like studying their playbook came from homework. They looked like they had searched themselves over for spots for weaknesses and honed. When the coach called them, they ran toward him as a unit, golden ponytails swinging together like bright bells on Christmas morning. It was more than just basketball though. In the way they walked, you could see that they knew what a jerry was and how to use it. and how to diagram a sentence and conjugate a verb in French and ride a horse and play piano. And then the part I already read, they couldn't relate to us well enough to perceive which of us had unacceptable hairstyles. So that whole paragraph is similar to how I felt coming here to see you. I basically got myself together, doing the best I could, moving from school to school to school in my own childhood, like 13 different elementary schools, just moving all over the place, trying to put together an education well enough to compete. So, but then I see there are certain skills you can learn to get high SAT scores and to learn how to study and to excel. There are people have that track, and I just felt like this was a very poignant example of how that doesn't happen for everyone. So I could relate to the story in that way.
Thank you. I wrote it for you, I guess.
You did. We all have that feature. We just totally know. So I'll take this for a second to ask you, because we met in the summer bridge program.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, did that make it wilder to have, all minority people and one white teacher, as I recall. So did that ease it for getting into?
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it seems like it might have created the illusion of, well, this is quite comfortable.
No, I felt, because mass program, summer bridge, when you're moving from the school, like George Washington High School, not the IB program, just a regular X-track, maybe some AP courses. But that was very helpful. Like coming to campus, getting to know the campus, moving in slowly, even though there was a shock, like when school actually started. I was going to Denver every weekend because I didn't feel fully comfortable. I lived in Sewell, it's right over there. And it was a hard experience, but I eventually became comfortable, and I'm glad I did make the journey at CU, because I feel like the world, there's more of this kind of world that is not marginalized in order to be comfortable in. Like it's hard for people who haven't had this experience and to be from somewhere that like I came from, or even worse, like it's hard for someone like that to fit in really, and feel good about being around this environment.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Am I done?
I guess you are. Well, no, because you're now back in my world. Good luck trying to get out now. Just good luck. And you too, Sam. You think you're going to get out? So, okay. So we do have the Miramontes representative of the Miramontes program, which is the mass program. It would be so interesting to have these stories, one or two of these stories used in the summer bridge thing, because it's, or possibly even to have a guest speaker on it.
I now teach and work in your market science program, but much has been after you.
Oh, yes. It was minority arts and sciences program. And then we were told, that's pretty fun, Alphonse and I were told that we would be sued by people who did not want exclusive programs, so the word minority had to change. And then Alphonse and I were told, I think this is right, I think we would verify this, we were told that we would be represented by the university council, and then rather abruptly, we were told that we wouldn't be, that we would find our own attorney. So that was pretty fun. So we didn't perform that in front of you guys. And that was after Dr. McKee had left. So anyway, so this memory lane, backing off here. So Sharika, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for reading that.
Bring it to the screen. And
How do I do this?
I guess we
talk
could.
to Zoom.
Okay. And we are going to have Ellie, who is again one of our, the Rosenblum scholars are really remarkable. And so she's part of this cohort, and I will let her, because I think it will probably come up as she's speaking, tell us more about herself and her story and how she then relates to some of these stories. So Ellie, good to see you.
Great. Hi, Patty. Thank you so much for having me to do this. It's such a joy as a historian to get to talk about fiction, because like my heart is in fiction, even though I do nonfiction. Okay, so I thought that I would start talking about Casa Del Rey. So I wasn't sure, Jenny, if you wanted to kind of share a quick summary of that story with everyone.
Okay, I can do a quick summary. So Casa Del Rey, it's a married couple. The woman is newly pregnant. They live in a condo complex in Boulder. They're just kind of barely able to live here as far as finances go. And the condo complex is a little bit run down and has some strange people there. And then a really strange neighbor moves in and starts making trouble for the married couple. But this story follows a pattern I like to teach my students called the crazy neighbor story. And this is a classic template for fiction, I think, because we all have had crazy neighbors. And the pattern of the crazy neighbor is that it starts out with the narrator being like, get a load of my crazy neighbor. And then by the end of the story, you see that the crazy one was the person that was calling the other person crazy. So there's a realization at the end of their common humanity, and that the narrator wasn't being generous enough with her neighbor. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. So what I wanted to talk about in this story that really jumped out at me is this idea of inspiration porn as it concerns disabled people. So if you haven't heard that term before, it was coined by Stella Young in 2012, and it refers to the way that non-disabled people celebrate disabled people for doing ordinary things. So like going to school or being out in public, or in the case of this story, the opening paragraph talks about the tenant who lived in the apartment before the neighbor who Jenny mentioned moves in. He's called by the main characters portrait in courage. And this is why, quote, he used to jog daily on the bike path nearby, despite the awkward hitch to his gait. He'd moved slower than the pace at which most people walked, but we could tell by the way he pumped his arms that he thought of it as running. Nothing we have to do is that difficult, I'd tell my husband, Jamie, end quote. So here you see this man running every day is used as inspiration for the non-disabled characters to say, you know, if he can do that, he can overcome his disability in that way. Well, then we have no excuse not to try something else, or not to succeed at what we're doing, right? So using it as inspiration. And so what inspiration porn does to disabled people is that it dehumanizes them, because it turns them into this one-dimensional object to be used by non-disabled people. And so this is connected to the charity model of disability, where the main relationship between a non-disabled and a disabled person would be one of pity and charity, right? And so in this model, the disabled person is seen as a burden on their family and their community. And, you know, any help that they get, the disabled person is meant to be really grateful for it. And I won't talk about it now because I don't think that we have time to get into it, but we see this theme come up in the story community relations as well, which I can talk about more if we end up having time for that. But in this story, we see this idea of inspiration porn get kind of like exploded a little bit, really get pushed back against by this new neighbor who moves into Richard's apartment. And Richard is the portrait in courage. That's his nickname by the main characters. So Vanita is this new neighbor. She is also physically disabled. She's going to have knee surgery soon. And the main characters see her as this more unworthy disabled person because she is chaotic and loud and she takes up space. kind of like space in their minds, but also physical space. If you read the story, you'll see she has a lot of stuff. So space becomes really important. And so I want to do one more quote to kind of show the comparison that the main character makes between this kind of less worthy disabled person versus the inspirational disabled person. So quote, "I'd observe her activity during the day and describe it to Jamie the minute he came home. Did you see she's got a handicap tag on her rear view mirror now? I asked him. She wore a brace and hobbled around, making a big production out of it. Unlike Richard, who tried to hide his limp. She doesn't deserve to live in Fortune Encourage's condo." So here we see the way that like this idea of inspiration porn when it comes to disabled people has like a real impact on personal relationships when those stereotypes get busted, when disabled people are multifaceted and sometimes unlikable, right? And that it pushes against this idea of just being one-dimensional. So, you know, this story shows, I think, a reality, a hardship that some disabled people face in their relationships, interactions. But at the end, it also shows, in what my opinion is kind of a solution, is a way forward. And that's this idea of solidarity over charity. So I hope it's okay. I was going to spoil the end because I think it's really powerful. Vanita, the neighbor, she, the last scene is her driving the main character, who has been pregnant throughout the course of the story, to the hospital while she's in labor. And these two had been kind of having a kind of passive aggressive fight over a parking spot that was closer to the condo building. And the main character, Carrie, she'd called the tow truck on Vanita's car a couple times. And so she was expecting, you know, Vanita not to like her and not to help her out. And when she does, Carrie asks Vanita, why are you doing this? Why are you helping me? And Vanita says, it's because we're neighbors. And so this, I think, is the most powerful part of the story, where you see a non-hierarchical relationship, right? This isn't Vanita giving charity to Carrie. This is them coming at this relationship and saying, we're both neighbors, we help each other out. This is how I'm helping you out today, driving you to the hospital. So I found this story in some ways maybe a little frustrating at first, and then really appreciated that journey by the end of it. And I thought it ended on this really, really hopeful note. Okay, I talked a lot. I don't know if any of this was like in your head, Jenny, as you were writing this, or if you had kind of heard of this concept of inspiration porn or like charity model before. It's a little academic.
No, that's totally interesting. And I wonder if you would, what is it like to be so thoroughly and expertly analyzed?
That's awesome.
I mean, that just seems like are these psychiatric interventions?
It's awesome because I'm just a small press author. I don't get that many reviews or anything. So like to have someone so intelligent, like analyze all these themes and think about it, it's great. Yeah. So I wonder, I don't know if you read the last story in the book, yeah. But that's kind of inspired more by my own experience. So I definitely know about inspiration porn, and I have someone in my family with a disability. And so I know all about trying to get services and resources for an education for people, and how people treat you and how people look at you. So I think in each story, I'm showing a different facet of characters, and maybe even parts of myself before I was more enlightened too. Thoughts that I've heard or thoughts that I've had. But I hope that, the ending of the story is the point. That's the point. I call it a Flannery O'Connor cosmic comeuppance ending. When someone has been so morally wrong, the whole story, the ending like gives them a punch in the face. And that's what my narrator deserved in that story.
But a way to treat a pregnant woman.
Yeah.
So it's occurred to me that I have, by separating individuals, I think I'm going to start blurring the segment a little bit here, because since we were talking about disability and responses to disability and clumsier ways and more intrusive and damaging ways of that, I think I have drawn too strong a line here between having Ellie up here and having Karen Boyd up here at the same time. Because, in fact, so I think what we'll do is, instead of saying goodbye, Ellie, we're bringing on the next person. Stay there, Ellie, and let's bring Karen in, if that's viable. And then we'll really make our interpreter work really hard for this, with two folks to keep on the screen there, and Jenny and me. Now she's got 4 people on board. So, okay, so hey, so you've heard this conversation, and I'm not sure, I think I exhorted you to read the one particular story, the signing for Lyman. So you may or may not have had the time yet to read the stories that Ellie's talking about. But if there's anything that you would like to comment on the inspiration porn idea, on the perceptions of people with disabilities that are sometimes life affirming and sometimes not, I mean, anything that you would like to add to this conversation, we would welcome that.
Okay. She's like, okay, testing 1, 2, 3. Can you all hear me all right? Can you hear my voice okay? Quote my voice.
Yes.
Very funny. I just wanted to, talk a little bit about myself here.
Yes.
I was born deaf, of deaf parents, and I have a deaf brother and a deaf sister. So my entire family is deaf. So we are, so it's my first heritage language, and I taught ASL for so many years. So for a very long time. And I enjoy reading books, regarding sign language and limiting and related with different positions in football, linemen. And so it was really interesting to see how they move around and how sign language is involved in that, and observing that, and then also working with the ASL classes. I started teaching mid-1970s, just for those that wanted to become a sign language interpreter. So they started taking those classes. And then later on, in the 90s, I was like, okay, hey, I should be open to anyone that just wants to learn American Sign Language, not just to be an interpreter. So then at that time, in the 1990s or so, there was a lot of changes going on in our lives, and people learning American Sign Language in the classrooms, and the teaching and the tutorings and the styles and the practices changed. And then Colorado recognized ASL as a recognized foreign language in 2004. So it was 10 years later, 10 years later, 2014, I graduated, or master's program. I was teaching ASL, and then I saw these books, and I thought that were really thorough and explaining ASL and teaching and stuff. And I thought, oh, this would be great, but how do we get more training to teach in the classroom at the time? So, but also at the time with IDAA, it was oppressive. A lot of deaf people didn't have the opportunities back then like they have today. Until most recently, the movie that gave us a lot of exposure was Coda. As you saw, that it wore, one of the actors won an Academy Award for Best Movie, Best Supporting Actor. And so more and more people, because of that, have become more exposed to us. And so going back to the Lymans and in certain chapters, there are different pieces in there that show the history of how students were learning and how they were experiencing being tutored in American Sign Language, and the fear and the struggles that they went through, and how deaf people said, hey, it's super easy to learn. But it wasn't. It was a lot of struggle. So I liked commenting on that, or having that being commented on. So it was really nice to have that dialogue, about it in the book at ASL and how the students were learning and their approach and their feedback on it regarding the language. So I thought that was all really interesting. So I loved having that experience, and it was really nice to know, how they felt, and also to have this thorough discussion about the language. Like, it was very different back then compared to how it is today. So I know that people are more aware of us now. People react very differently from us. So, I'm just looking at my notes here. At that time, the students were learning ASL. It was not like as popular. It wasn't as popular of a language to learn. It was very frustrating for them, and they didn't have as many resources available for them. So Kimberly, who was one of the tutors, was struggled. And now today we have so many more resources to support them, which is quite different than before. And also at that time, because of the lack of resources, ASL wasn't as well known. But today, American Sign Language, did you know it's the third most spoken language and most popular language, third most popular language throughout the United States and taken in college? So it's really just gone up exponentially. So part of the...
I'm just wondering.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
If we should have Jenny summarize the story. So this has been a great story, but I'm just thinking that maybe our group here who hasn't read the story should have a quick summary of that story, Signing for Lineman. And then we want you back in, but it's wonderful. They're already oriented to the story, but just a few words on the story.
Okay, so in my story, Signing for Lineman, there's a PhD student in medieval literature. And for her summer job, she takes a job tutoring football players at the university. And she's been hired because she's an expert in languages, and she knows a lot of languages like Old English and Italian and things like that. But what they need her to teach or help the students learn is ASL, because that's the language that the football players do best at, because they're physically gifted, and they make play signs from the sidelines to talk about the plays. And so they just understand it really well. And you don't have to write papers either. You just give, you talk, you give presentations, you make skits. So it's not the more oppressive type of language learning. But so Kim has this job, she's supposed to help them, but she's useless at it. And in fact, in the story, she's learning more from everyone else than they are learning from her, who's supposed to be in the teacher role. In the story, the football players comprise like 60 or 70% of the class, but then the other students are communication studies grad students, older white women. And they get a little jealous that the football players are so gifted at ASL, and they end up accusing them of cheating. But the teacher, he's mad. You can tell he's mad at the grad students, because he doesn't think that the football players are cheating, but because they made this accusation, they had to bring in a hearing teacher to monitor the exams, which undermines his authority, because the class was conducted totally in signs and a little bit of writing on the chalkboard until that happened. So there's a big confrontation. There's a big championship game.
And tell them how the championship.
Okay, so then they have a competition where they have to draw a word in ASL and sign it to their partners, and they get a point for each one they get right. And the football players just demolish the grad students. So that's how it goes.
So, okay, so excellent. So Karen, anything else that go back to where you were talking about that story and the, I mean, I cry at the end of that story. I read it maybe 3 times now, I guess. And Sam is thinking, yeah, right. So I cry, big deal. I do that all the time. But I find that ending so, it's just a triumph it's certainly a triumph for the teacher. And it's really a triumph for the teacher-student relationship. And the tutor, the poor tutor who can't tutor anybody because she can't do it that well herself. So it's just, it is, and I guess we just have to enjoy the fact that the Wimpy graduate students have to take it on the chin.
Yeah, they'll be fine. They lost that one.
They'll win other places. So, okay, so if you wouldn't mind just a little bit of how reading the story affected you emotionally, Karen, did you mostly think, well, I've been there and I've had that experience, or was it just, did it seem very familiar, or were there dimensions that seemed a little bit different from what you experienced yourself? Whatever you'd like to say about how you responded to reading the story, and if you thought yes, I know this exactly, or it's a bit different, or whatever.
Yeah, well, this story for me was more of like an account of a hearing person, Kimberly, who was the tutor, and then the football players were hearing. And so for me, it didn't have any relationship really specifically to me as a deaf individual. There were little things that maybe tapped into my culture, like just teaching sign language at the teacher, in one part they said, yeah, there was a little bit of struggles in their relationships. And I could relate to that based on some experience of learning languages and how to relate with the tutors and the teachers. So on that aspect, I can relate for sure. But dealing with the football players and working with the tutor, I can kind of understand that. But for me, what a relief is that with the deaf culture, it's very, very, very sensitive to a person that's a hearing person writing about a deaf culture, writing about our culture. So when reading it, I wasn't so sensitive about that. It was nice seeing just their perspective because it was definitely different.
Just maybe a few words on what that story would have been if a deaf person if the teacher had written it.
Well, it's not that easy. So I would say if a person who is not deaf writes about deaf culture, that's a little sticky for us. It's not much appreciated. Having them write about us without actually working with us and knowing us. And, maybe they might have a deaf person come in and consult with them and review their work, and their writings and get the green light and go ahead and print it. And so they do that. But if they don't do that and don't do their homework for sure, and they're off the point, we would have some objection. But this book is really not really about deafness and deaf culture. It's more just kind of humorous, some frustrating parts, sign language and their challenges, etc.
Interesting. So, Ellie, do you want to say anything about that story and where it fits in your thinking? And that should be probably pretty brief because we should move to our next.
Yeah, so I think as Patty mentioned, I look at disability activism really broadly by ordinary disabled people and how they made laws meaningful to their lives. And so I think I approach my work as like a scholar activist. So one of the things that came up for me in this was, imagining like what could these football players who had this like great experience learning American Sign Language kind of turn around and do for the deaf community? Like how are they in turn trying to be more inclusive on their team or at their games or something like that? So it becomes not just about kind of extracting knowledge from the deaf community for themselves, but also about making it more reciprocal. And really thinking about this within the world of the story, not so much, writing it or something like that. And I guess maybe, applying that to my own work. I have one type of disability, but there are many, many, many disabilities that I don't have. And so, if I'm writing about them in my research for my dissertation, how am I trying to give back and have the work be reciprocal? So that's just something, I don't know, maybe specific to me that I thought about while reading it. But I did really like the idea, the kind of tension between the graduate students versus the football players who were much more interested in the full kind of life and culture of the language, right? They wanted the swear words. But not, maybe to bring it back around really quick to, my started idea of inspiration porn is the way that disabled people have been desexualized a lot. But that's not true. Disabled people have, full healthy relationships. The fact that one of the skits they do in the story takes place at a bar, right, is about relationships, I think that that's really important to kind of recognize and show. So I appreciated those little moments in the story.
Those are great comments, and we are, no, I hate these things, and, okay, so I have this stupid thing here, so, okay, so I am going to say to both Karen and Ellie, thank you so much for joining us, and please stay with us and listen to the next section here, but I'm coming over wherever.
You're welcome.
I'm going to visit you at some point, Karen, and I'm going to be not a good visitor for you. I'm going to be somebody that you just think, why did she come over here? But whatever you would like to do with me, I am determined to be better on this whole, just that question, what could the football players have done in supporting this world? Well, okay, so this is an empty threat in some ways. It'll take me a while before I come over there to visit, but I would love to be in your company at some point. So thank you, and Ellie, I'll see you again on Rosenblum land soon. So thank you both very much. And let's. So we have the story. Everybody's got the story of the football players in the sign language. And little Kim, who is not, well, that's not really, what was her name they called you?
Kimberly, they called me Genuine Jen.
Genuine Jen, she's a good name. So, okay, so at this point, so Sam Rapp was in my class, and he was one of the first to take my Western American Studies. I think you were in a discussion section of Howard Lamar's class, and that went well. And so then he reappeared, and then in another class, a seminar, and then Jimmy and Mark and other people. I had no nicknames for you guys. I never came up with anything that was clever like Jen. So pretty soon I had a couple of classes that were so wonderful. There were seminars, and people would come into the room, and the people with normal sized necks and shoulders would go sit on one side of the seminar table. And then people on the other side would have large necks and shoulders. And that would be a kind of uncrossable line for a few meetings of the class. And then some of the normal sized neck and shoulder people would kind of come over to me, and they'd go, I talked to one of those guys. He's really pretty smart. He's really pretty smart. Oh, that's really great. I'm glad we got that cut down now. So I suppose that would be my reason. And then I don't know what, 1/3 of the way through the semester everybody was just hanging out. So, and then then you would come to my house, where we once had a keg, I'm sure I was violating university policy with that. So let's not put that on there. So, okay, so now we are going to have, and Sam lives here in the Boulder area and was a little bit too close, but just safe on the Marshall Fire. His house was 200 feet from where it stopped. So we were so happy to have you here with an intact house to go home to. And this is, yeah, so here's Sam Rapp. And what was your position? I can't remember that. That's terrible.
I was a very small linebacker. Not be able to play on the CU teams of today, that's for sure. So,
okay, good. And so you read this story.
I did.
And now you can speak to its author.
Yeah, and I have before the class too, so that was very helpful. I didn't have the actual book. I had a scanned version, so I wasn't able to write the margins and everything like some wonderful presenters before me. But I think the biggest thing that immediately struck me about the story, it was when I showed up on campus, I went from what I thought was one of the better students in my high school to being the dumbest person in the world, right? Because there was a collection of really smart people, and all of a sudden you were reduced down. And then you throw in the fact that you were an athlete as well. And so many of the other kids who weren't athletes at school were shunned and looked down upon the athletes. And while that wasn't maybe brought out viscerally in the book, in that chapter, in that story, I still, that's what it brought back for me reading about it, right? Because when we discovered Patty, she was kind of our little Kim savior, even more so because she actually drew out of us the best that could be had, and made us feel more comfortable with sharing our intellectual capacity, right? Is most of the time people expected us to be in this athletic role. They were intimidated by us. We were big people. We had deep voices. We were intimidating. At least that's what people told me years later at reunions. And I was like, really? We're intimidating? I didn't feel that intimidating. I was just as insecure as you were. But that's not the way we came across. So it brought me back to that time where they looked at us like the grad students looked at the football players in the story. And maybe they didn't go to the extremes of accusing us of cheating, but they said a lot of nasty things behind our backs and treated us poorly. And so as a result, we kind of withdrew to our own social settings. And that was probably not optimal. I mean, we would have got a lot more out of the school. Enter someone like little Kim, little Patty, whatever, then it opened that back up for us, right? And as she explained in the latter parts of the classes, we actually began to really interact with all the rest of the people, and they started to view us as normal people, and we started to not shudder at seeing them as somebody that was 10 times smarter than us, and all the rest of that. So I think that was really, really good. And yeah, there was probably a lot of sophomore boorish behavior that was described among the football players that we were certainly capable of as well. But I think as a category, Patty helped to little Patty, little Kim helped break that down for us, right? And that made the whole educational experience that much richer as a result. So like I said, a lot there, just things that the story brought back for me, but it definitely resonated in that it was us versus them. And we did like to compete. We were competitive athletes, and we did want to win intellectually as well. And we were just looking for our shot to do that, right? So, and maybe it wasn't sign language, it was competing with the best answer in Patty's class or whatever it was, but some way to show that we were worthy, right? And I don't know if those football players maybe thought that way, but they certainly enjoyed winning.
Oh,
Yeah, they certainly enjoyed that. So,
And the cool, like the football players that I tutored, some cool things have happened with them. Like Jay Sean Sykes, I tutored him, then he took my creative writing class, and then he played for the Broncos for a little bit, and then now he's an athletic director in a school in California, and he's a published children's book author.
wow.
And so I'm proud of him. And then another one of my students became a Denver City councilman from the same group of football players. So I always thought they were smart and capable and cool.
Yeah.
Mention the way that you use the descriptions. I thought that was really.
So in this story, I have, I'm gonna find it. I have the text that where the characters are described. It's meant to look like a football media guide, where it gives like their height and weight and some details that you would find in a media guide, but then it goes into stuff that you wouldn't know, like emotional details or something they wouldn't know.
Weaknesses.
Yeah, and when I originally wrote this story, I also had picture drawings I did of sign language, because I was trying to get the sign language into it, but I couldn't get it published with the drawings. So, but that was my first.
Then you did the very funny thing of putting your own description in. I don't know if you can find that, but it's so great. It's just the way that they are all objectified.
Yes.
In those descriptions, you have. Can we find the thing about
Which
little
one do
Kim?
you want?
I want
Little
the one
Kim's?
where you brought the little Kim one.
Okay, she's introduced. You want me to read that?
I want you. Yes.
Okay, so Kimberly Pritchard, 5'0", 100 pounds, third-year PhD student out of Pennington, New Jersey. Strengths: adept at many languages, plays the flute, has owned a 4.0 GPA since kindergarten, with the exception of 4th grade when she earned a C in penmanship. Weaknesses, socially awkward, obsessed with medieval literature.
So I'm going to engage in a little bit. Okay, so I always thought of myself, Greek traditions are interesting, and the story of Androcles and the lion, where the lion has a thorn in his paw, and the lion is upset about that. Who would be? And everyone is frightened. And then Androcles goes up and takes the thorn out, and then the lion is Androcles' friend. And so it sort of matches what you said there, was that I felt I was Androcles to your lion, your lions, because there were a bunch of lions in that pack. And I felt like it was just, and I'm not saying that I was not ill at ease, maybe at the start, I can't remember if I was or not, but it just seems like after I said, it's a really good sentence. A few times the thorn was out. And that was quite a wondrous.
Well, yeah, and I think just being recognized for doing something well was challenging in that environment if you were an athlete. And so you were one of the few people that could do that for us. And now the other part I think you were touching on a little bit earlier is just the way teachers can inspire people to be better than they thought they could be. I mean, that was, that's what she did for us. And maybe the football players didn't get that from little Kim in this story, but they at least were motivated to win the competition. And so they were really good on that day.
And it is interesting though, that they do in the story, they do affirm that other graduate students in that, not little Kim, but the other graduate students can say, well, look at them, they're just big.
Yeah.
So that they do embrace the stereotype, because I at least play with that a little bit. So that was an interesting aspect of that. And I'll tell you something, I'm sure I never told you, that I was going through a rough period. I got to teach a lot of classes, and there was an investigation about whether I got to teach too many classes. Remember, there's a little weird phase where you guys had to fill out evaluations every few minutes. It was very tedious. So anyway, so there were 3 or 4 graduate students. There were people who had made this a campaign, and it was not an easy period of my life. And I don't know, I didn't do much of this, but I think a few private times I thought, I've got some really strong friends. And you were never asked to do anything. I never mentioned all that stuff to you. I don't think I ever told you that, but there was just these moments of thinking, well, all right, wimpy graduate students. All right, we'll just see. So that was pathetic. I've never said that publicly in my life, but it was an interesting moment.
Yeah, I just found that there were forces at the school that worked against you. And so that was something I could relate to in that story, because all the grad students were just, look at these idiots, they'll never do anything right. We're going to crush them in this competition. And then they're shocked that they didn't win. Right. And we love doing that, right? Shocking you. Yes.
So, and then one last thing I wanted to say about this, though, is that I would go to the games to watch you guys. And one time, which I never repeated, I had binoculars. And I saw how hard you were getting hit.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't know about concussions and how frequent they could, what lasting effects they could have, and you were not in NFL competitions. I get that. But that sitting there with Jeff and I had these binoculars, and I was just thinking, those are my students.
No, I hated watching my guys play.
Yeah.
I hated watching them get laid out. Oh, I was like, he has to write an essay.
That's right.
Get up, he's got to write an essay.
Don't hurt his brain.
Right. He's got a really good brain. So just recognize that.
No sensible person would play a game where you run into other people that hard. I mean, it's one of those crazy things you get out of your system in your 20s. So. But yeah, no, that's accurate.
Well, I mean, that was, I'm not sure, again, I ever told you folks that I had been just almost down on the field. Stop this. Don't do this anymore. So,
yeah.
Oh, well. So, okay, so now we have an opportunity for a few minutes of questions or comments from audience members.
Well, thank you for everyone for reading my story.
And Sharika, let's get you back up here too, so you can be a part of the question and answer period here. So stay there.
Oh,
Okay, no.
Big pen. Okay, so I think Jenny has had a great opportunity here because of this intensity of them, everyone just reading this thing and coming into your world.
Yes,
So
it's very rare to be read. My friend Paul was laughing, like we were just like struggling writers, you know, like we read each other's stories. Not that many other people do, so it's really cool. Yeah.
well, comments, questions, thoughts from the audience.
Well, I have a comment. I didn't get to say when I was commenting that I appreciate the way you write with like witnessing what was happening without, I think you say that's non-patronizing, but I just feel like you're able to talk about race without like the undertones of racism. Some people are afraid to talk about race or differences because they, you know, they might feel like they're going to be offensive or do something wrong. But I just feel like it was probably because you were there, you know, you experienced it. And when you're able to be within a culture different than your own, you get a different perspective and you have a different way, just sort of like more authentic way of witnessing someone of different than you. So you could tell that in the writing.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, that's what I'm trying for. And yeah, I mean, I think you read a lot that I've read some studies that white parents often don't discuss race with their children or like don't bring it up or don't want to bring it up. But it's like I knew about race like from when I got on that bus and like we talked about everyone else's culture, and it was something from my very youngest days that I was talking about and learning about and seeing how some people did something different than my parents did, and just learning about all the different ways there are to be.
And you were really in the school situation, you were seeking the approval of, or you were hoping, your characters were just like, oh, I hope my locker mate.
Yeah, because well, sometimes because of the way we were bussed around, you'd end up with no friends at the new school.
Yeah.
And you would try to make friends.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right, so it's very different from we are the empowered majority and now we'll judge the others. It's really that, oh, if only the others would like us, that would be really good. And that, in Banning, we went from separate elementary schools with Mexican American people and poor white people in one school, black people in another school, and then a central school. And in 5th grade, we were all together. And the first day, 2 sisters, twins, came up and asked me if I would like to go to the park and fight afterwards. They were both black. And we had not had black students in our west side of the small town. And I said, no, I don't think I would like that. And so they said, well, then I guess we won't do it. So I thought, oh, okay, that's pretty good. And then Petronella Benson kind of oversaw this, and she came over just to say, no, don't be doing that. And so she was the peacemaker. And as you'll notice, that happened quite a while ago. And I remember her name, Petronella Benson, because I thought, no, this could go poorly. And now Petronella has rescued me, and so it's really good. So I think that's the situation that's sort of like yours, in that in that school, there wasn't anything to do except to think, no, I don't want to fight. And it would be very nice if a peacemaker came and really sort of affirmed that. And I don't think I think with all of this, the separations of geographical alignments and people I don't think this is a very rare experience for a child to have that.
Yeah, but I mean, shouldn't it be the experience we have in America? If we're a country with all different kinds of people and that's what our country is, shouldn't we be mixing more, crossing over and going to school together? So that it's not weird. Like people that haven't been, like when I got to see you and I was tutoring those football players, it was me in a room with all big black guys. I was like, this feels like home. Like, yeah, this feels like high school. That's how it should be. You should have enough experiences like that you could go into any room like that and be like, this is America.
This is where I am.
These are Americans. We are like this. I feel normal.
Right. What was race on the Yale football team? What was that?
Well, see, sports is really just the great equalizer. No one cares about your race. They just want to care about how good you are, right? If you could help as a teammate win a game, that's what they care about. It's not about what race you are, so no one really cared.
I write about sports a lot because it's one of the few places where we do have crossover.
Yep.
That's true.
Yeah, but there should be more.
Quite.
A lot more.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So, so I said that you could comment and have questions, and then I kept you from making comments or questions, so that's a form of, because that's just called inconsistency, and I'm sure they never saw me do that in class. I'm sure I never did.
Dominate? Well, it's about, class is about over. Okay, Patty's done talking. Yes, okay. It was always really interesting.
Well, and then actually, when you said the thing about getting the best answer, we did things that they were so good natured about. We read Clarence King's Mountaineering in the Sierra Nevada. And they were, and Clarence King, who was the first director of the US Geological Survey, had very ornate language in describing landscapes. So there you are, you're very good sports, really. So I say, okay, so I want everybody to describe the Yale Library, and I want you to overwrite the way Clarence King did, and I want you to use way too many adjectives and so on. And I'm going to have you write as if it were a really scary place, and then I'm going to have you write as if it were a place of high spirits and festivity and so on. So everybody's got their emotion, and they're all so good natured. Actually, the one time I had with Mary Rowlandson, they were going to, I'm sorry, this is not what we're supposed to be doing tonight, but they were going to write about the captivity narrative of Mary Rowlandson. And I was going to have them write a recommendation letter for Mary Rowlandson as a captive. And so Randy Ledward, you know, he was a hockey player.
Yes.
How'd that hockey player get in our world? I don't know, but he, so everybody takes up their pen and they start to write. She cries a lot, but she sews well. And so anyway, so they're writing about the captive, and Randy looks up and says, "We're writing a recommendation letter for a white woman in the 1600s, captive in New England." Yeah, that's what you're doing. So it's okay. So we're going on that one. But I think it might have been Randy who wrote about the, it has to have been him, when he was supposed to be writing about the Yale Library. It's a really scary place. And he said that the gremlins and so on, that the carvings, or what are those things called anyway, those, those.
On the outside.
Yeah, right.
Gargoyles.
Gargoyles.
Yes, thank you.
Right, the gargoyles remind me of the cherubs that used to dance through my dreams in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. It's just like,
That's
oh my
pretty good.
God, that's
You
really
got
good.
it.
So, and I'm afraid he might have won that particular.
Yeah,
because
for
that was,
sure.
but everybody won in that sport, because everybody said something that was deeply amusing to all the rest of us. And so I think that was, okay, so back again here. So Thompson's, what do you think? What have you been thinking, Thompson's? Do you want to say anything, Thompson's?
Well, of course, we haven't read it. This is the first time we've laid.
I know, that's what we were trying to provide hot summaries for.
We're coming back from Palm Desert, Palm Springs area in California. And they don't have books there.
That is very close to banning California.
It is, yes.
Very close to
Yeah.
So we didn't lay our hands on the book until tonight, and we're passing it back and forth, looking at the table of contents.
You could have two. How about this? Why don't you, now you don't have to pass them back and forth then.
We only want one.
What do you have to do?
If you want your
Give me a one you want.
Okay, okay. Now you don't- Come back here, please. Then we need this. Yeah.
Down here.
Okay, and you do have, if you didn't get a book, you'll notice we have some here. So this is for Jack and Jeannie Thompson. Okay, now that was a comment. You could call that a comment from you. But you now have a thirst to read this book, am I right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, okay.
That's correct.
Well, I wanted to write in it from the comments that were being
Oh.
made,
That's
but
good.
I decided that was tacky.
There's
a bunch of writings in my
It's not right in my book.
You can't write in it unless you've read it, unless you're reading.
Oh, that's probably true. That is true, actually, that is true. Oh, good, they're very edifying. Yeah, Karen.
I just wondered, Jenny, if you could tell us the book that you were referencing again. I didn't
Oh.
quite hear it.
This is called White Flights by Jess Rowe.
That's right,
It's
okay.
race fiction and the American imagination. It's a little bit heady. It's like literary criticism, which I usually don't read, but it's like, it really underlined some of the things I had been thinking, not as eloquently as he puts it. Yeah, so it's a good book.
Okay, comments? Questions? Yes, please.
Just to follow up on that, Jenny, you know, the comment that often stated that the most segregated time in American culture is 10 a.m. on Sunday mornings. And I have a friend who's a writer who said, and the other is in American fiction.
Oh.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is you don't want to get it wrong. You want to be, but I think you just have to blunder forward to try and do it in a respectful way without appropriating or telling a story that's not yours to tell. But I think that we belong together in our books and in life too. And I think it's important to read books by Black authors, by deaf authors. I just read about a new novel that came out that's getting, I forget the name of it because things got on my head when I'm up here, but by a deaf author that's getting really good praise. That I want to check out. And so we should read everybody's books and learn from them. And that's what it should really be, like a whole diet, a whole complement of books. And we shouldn't be walled off from each other.
I did send around to this group, I sent the recent piece, yesterday's New York Times, which I thought was kind of a brave piece of the person, say Pamela Paul, who quoted Henry Louis Gates, who is always a noted African-American scholar. He says, whenever we treat an identity as something to be fenced off from those of another identity, we sell short the human imagination. And she says different versions of that if we say you cannot write about a group unless you are a member of that group, then what happened to curiosity and to empathy and to crossing of the borders there? Although we did have, and that was very useful, that we have Karen saying you didn't get it.
Yeah, I'm sure I didn't get it because I could tell from witnessing deaf culture that there were things I wasn't understanding because I didn't know the language well enough. So, but I still have a story with that existing in it, you know, and you just try. And it's the reader's right to say, this is not quite right. And then to write your own story or to point out what's good. Like I'm thinking, so my son is in 7th grade and they're reading To Kill a Mockingbird and I'm reading it with him. And you know, that book's been banned in certain places. And I haven't read it since I was little, but I'm reading it now. I'm like, this is a good book. I'm a little uncomfortable. There's a lot of N words in it. And, but it is a good book and I'm glad they're reading it. But I'm also glad because this book is, it's from the perspective of the white family. It's really a white hero narrative. And the Black folks in the story are just put in the position of being appreciative of whatever help the white folks give them. So I'm really glad that his teacher gave him this book in the context of the whole rest of the year. He was reading stories from the perspective of a woman whose grandmother was in the Japanese internment camps, stories from a Syrian refugee. He was reading all kinds of stories. So if you just read one story, one perspective, it's not enough. You have to have all of it so that you can see, oh, okay, this is a good book, but it doesn't exist in isolation. We need all the books together.
Right, and exactly that's the piece that I did find so quotable yesterday's Times, because it seemed like she would wanted to be on our cover. Just to say that this lady, the New York Times, is sad that she wasn't able to join us tonight. But if we all wrote only from our personal experiences, our films, performances, and literature would be reduced to memoir and transcription. What an impoverished culture that would be. So I just think there's something that is, people's fragility is so right now, and the fear that you will have a reader say, you shouldn't have done that. You were out of your territory, you were invading mine. I mean, I think there's such anxiety about.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's true, but it's also because people have messed up in the past. Like I read that article and then I read some of the commentaries of my favorite Black writers on Twitter about it.
Oh, what
and
is
some, like such as Roxanne Gay, she's like, not this again. Because, and the comments, because she's like, it's not that we're saying don't do it, we're saying do it right if you do it. Like they're like, it has to be good writing. You have to write about the other people in a way that's authentic, and not taking our story, but doing it right.
Okay, so
there's a way, it's not like you shouldn't give someone like carte blanche to do it. However, do it with authenticity and respect for the other culture,
and humility
and all
would
that.
be good. Yeah, I was when
well, okay, so we haven't done our main agenda item here. We need a couple minutes to do this. How do we get her better known?
I don't know, I have to publish my next book with the bigger publisher, I guess. I'll
Okay.
try.
We got an action item there. I really mean this. I seem to be making a joke, but I really am trying to think how to do that.
Tell the people, go to a book group and read
Yeah,
books, tell your
I do
friends.
like to visit book groups, so if you have a reading group, you can read my book.
Yeah.
talk to
they
you.
can read, study, work.
Sure. Well, I tell you, my Denver Post columns, my monthly Denver Post columns, they have a giant impact. You wouldn't believe. There's 4 people, I think, who read them.
I've read
Pretty
them,
big
I've read them.
I read them. I read your last one just yesterday.
Oh, interpreters.
Yes.
Well, right, but it is weird. I've never written a piece about her, so I could do that.
Do it. I've never been mentioned in the Denver Post because they don't review short stories, so.
They don't review
Oh.
short stories. That's a great principle. That's really,
Yeah.
they can have, I mean, my limit is 550 words in a column, so you can certainly have short
Yeah.
stories there, but they're just not that kind of. Okay, so anybody who has ideas about this, you know where to find me. And I think we have filled our time. Oh, Ellie, do you want to say anything as a goodbye remark to us over here? Because there you are still on screen.
I would just add this idea about reading from a lot of perspectives. One book that's really great, it's a series of like first person narratives by disabled authors, is Disability Visibility. I think it came out 2020 maybe, pretty recent, but yeah, I think that's so important to be getting both sides from that. Jenny, I loved your perspectives in these stories of like non-disabled people having disabled people in their lives, because the vast majority of us do, but I'd love to put that in conversation then with stories that are written by disabled people. So I love that idea. Maybe a book group could do that too. Do a little like pairing, it'd be great.
There's a lot of power in book groups. Who here is in a book group?
Oh, wow.
Well,
Some bookish
all righty there, go to it. Go to it. So, okay, that we have filled up our time, and I really want to thank.
Yeah, thank you, Patty, so much. Like, I don't think I've ever had. I said, thank you so much. I don't think I've ever had my writing paid attention to in such a way before.
Well, Thompson's, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And we do have, I'll just say that when we reviewed the list of the winners, there are a number of published writers there. So this is a pretty good thing that we have worked out here. Plus, I have stationed former students throughout the world, and they are spectacular, as is Andy's former students, and I mean, everybody here, but Karen's, every Ellen's. So, but this is really a great, just because you graduate, you think you've left us, huh? Well, okay, so it's so excellent to have had this occasion, and I didn't expect it to be as intense as
No,
this.
it's always intense when you get into these issues, but
Yeah.
it should be.
Yeah, I
It
guess,
should
but
go towards the uncomfortableness of it.
absolutely, and so love the awkwardness. So-
Yeah.
Alrighty, so okay, I'm reluctant to end this, as you can see. Okay, gone. So we'll
And I
hang out a
can
bit.
sign books if anyone.
Oh, the signed books, we've got
Yes.
plenty here, and so please get, if you don't have a book, come, and you don't have to buy it, you can just.
Yeah.
pick it up.
She bought you guys
So,
all
and
books.
I'll bring them so much. Oh, please, yeah.